The silence was absolute as Commander Aaliyah Winters removed her silver star. Judge Reynolds smirked, satisfied with his display of authority. He had no idea what was coming next. The classified folder hit his bench with a soft thud that somehow echoed through the entire courtroom. His face changed as he read the first page. Recognition, then fear. Security cameras captured the exact moment a federal judge realized his career was ending. All because he ordered a decorated SEAL sniper to remove her medal. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of justice served, subscribe for a new military story every Wednesday. Commander Aaliyah Winters straightened her dress blues one final time before entering courtroom 317. The irony of the number matching her confirmed kills wasn't lost on her, though she kept her expression neutral as she pushed through the heavy oak doors. Federal courthouses always felt foreign to her. After 15 years in the Navy SEALs, she was more comfortable in combat zones than corridors of civilian justice. The courtroom was half empty, typical for what most considered a routine military jurisdiction dispute. A few bored reporters sat in the back row, scrolling through phones, waiting for something more newsworthy. Her attorney, Martin Chen, former JAG officer turned civilian counsel, nodded as she approached. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Aaliyah gave a single nod. She was always ready. Preparation had kept her alive through 4 deployments and countless classified operations. This hearing was supposed to be straightforward, a jurisdictional question regarding evidence obtained during a military operation that might be used in a civilian prosecution. She was here merely as the officer of record, to confirm chain of custody details. "All rise," called the bailiff as a side door opened. "The United States District Court for the Southern District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Malcolm Reynolds presiding." Judge Reynolds swept into the room, black robes billowing behind him. At 58, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his power and enjoyed wielding it. His reputation preceded him, politically connected, ambitious, rumored to be angling for an appeals court appointment. He settled into his chair and glanced at the docket. "Be seated," he said, not looking up. "We have the matter of United States versus classified evidence from Operation—" He paused, frowning at the redacted document. "Well, from whatever operation the Department of Defense doesn't want me knowing about." His tone carried clear annoyance. Martin Chen rose. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of confirming evidence chain of custody. Commander Winters is present as the officer who secured the evidence in question." Reynolds finally looked up, his gaze settling on Aaliyah with obvious assessment. His eyes narrowed slightly at her uniform, then fixed on the silver star prominently displayed among her decorations. "Commander Winters, is it?" he asked, though the file clearly stated her name. "Yes, Your Honor," Aaliyah replied, standing. "I see you've come in full dress uniform, complete with decorations." Something in his tone suggested disapproval. "Standard procedure when appearing in court, Your Honor." Reynolds leaned forward. "This isn't a military tribunal, Commander. This is my courtroom." He gestured toward her chest. "And that display seems rather theatrical for what Mr. Chen assures me is a routine procedural matter." The courtroom remained quiet, but Aaliyah felt the shift in atmosphere. The few reporters in attendance had stopped scrolling on their phones. Her attorney tensed beside her. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is the appropriate attire for an officer appearing in formal proceedings." Reynolds' mouth tightened. "The medal, Commander. The silver star. Remove it." Martin Chen started to object, but Aaliyah placed a hand on his arm. She'd faced worse than a judge with an attitude problem. "Is that an order, Your Honor?" Her voice remained calm, professional. "Consider it so. We're not here to impress anyone with military decorations. This is about the rule of law, not battlefield heroics." The silence that followed was complete. Even the court stenographer paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Aaliyah could feel the reporter's sudden interest, the bailiff's discomfort, her attorney's controlled anger, but she showed nothing. With deliberate movements, she unpinned the silver star from her uniform. The medal, awarded after Operation Blackwater Dawn, a mission so classified even mentioning its name in this courtroom would violate national security, felt heavy in her palm. She placed it carefully on the table before her. "Thank you," Reynolds said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Now, let's proceed with—" "If I may, Your Honor," Aaliyah interrupted, reaching into her briefcase. Since we're discussing evidence from the operation in question, there's a related matter that should be brought to the court's attention. She withdrew a sealed folder, marked with multiple security classification stamps and the emblem of Naval Special Warfare Command. The folder had been delivered to her quarters that morning by a silent courier from intelligence. Unusual, unexpected, but with authorization codes she recognized. "What is this?" Reynolds asked, irritation clear in his voice. "We have a specific matter before us, Commander." "This pertains directly to the evidence chain of custody, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady. "It provides necessary context for the court to understand the circumstances under which the evidence was secured." She handed the folder to her attorney, who approached the bench and presented it to the judge. Reynolds took it with visible annoyance, breaking the seal with impatient fingers. Aaliyah watched his face as he read. She'd reviewed the contents herself that morning, piecing together what had been kept from her for 3 years. Now she observed the precise moment Reynolds realized what he was holding. His complexion paled. A slight tremor developed in his hands. His eyes darted up to meet hers, then back down to the documents. 3 years earlier, Aaliyah and her team had tracked a terrorist financing network across 3 countries, eventually discovering an elaborate money laundering operation. The mission had been abruptly terminated when the financial trail led back to American soil. She'd been ordered to stand down, told that domestic agencies would take over. The Silver Star came later, with a classified citation and instructions never to discuss the details of the operation. What she hadn't known until this morning was where that money trail had led. The documents now in Reynolds' hands spelled it out clearly. Shell companies, real estate developments, campaign contributions. And at the center of several transactions, Judge Malcolm Reynolds, then a prosecutor on a meteoric rise to the federal bench. Reynolds closed the folder with a snap. This is irrelevant to these proceedings, and potentially classified material that shouldn't be in this courtroom. With respect, Your Honor, it was properly declassified through appropriate channels this morning, Aaliyah stated. The authorization codes are on the cover sheet. The judge's eyes darted to the court reporter. Strike all reference to this document from the record. We're taking a 15-minute recess. He stood abruptly. Your Honor, Martin Chen spoke up. These documents have been properly submitted to the court. They cannot simply be removed from the record. Reynolds' face darkened. Mr. Chen, you're treading on dangerous ground. No less dangerous than accepting campaign financing from entities linked to terrorist organizations, Chen replied evenly. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The reporters in the back row were suddenly alert, scrambling to understand what was unfolding before them. This is outrageous, Reynolds sputtered. Bailiff, clear the court. But the court officer hesitated, glancing from the judge to the doors where 2 men in suits had quietly entered. They showed identification to the security guards, FBI credentials that caused another ripple through the observing crowd. Aaliyah remained standing, her posture perfect, expression composed. The Silver Star still lay on the table before her, catching the fluorescent light. She thought about the mission, about the men she'd lost tracking that money, about the lives that had been endangered because someone had decided some truths were too inconvenient to pursue. Reynolds must have realized the trap was closing. Security cameras mounted in the corners of the courtroom captured his expression shifting from outrage to calculation to something close to fear. He stared at Aaliyah with new understanding. You planned this, he said, voice barely carrying to the gallery. Aaliyah shook her head once. No, Your Honor. I followed orders. First to secure evidence of financial transactions funding enemy combatants, then to appear in your court today regarding that evidence. The connection between those orders became clear only this morning. The FBI agents approached the bench. One spoke quietly to the judge while the other stood back, watching the room. Reynolds sank slowly into his chair as though his legs could no longer support him. The reporters were on their feet now, some already slipping out to file initial reports, others recording every word on their phones despite court prohibitions against such recordings. No one moved to stop them. Martin Chen leaned toward Aaliyah. Did you know about this? He whispered. Not until today, she replied truthfully. But I suspected something was wrong when the operation was terminated prematurely. Chen shook his head in disbelief. They used you to deliver the evidence against him, in his own courtroom. Poetic justice, she murmured, watching as one of the FBI agents asked Reynolds to relinquish his phone. The judge's earlier confidence had evaporated entirely. He looked small behind the bench now, diminished by the weight of what those documents contained. The same documents outlined how Reynolds had systematically buried cases that might expose his connections, used his position to redirect investigations, all while building a reputation as a tough-on-crime jurist. Aaliyah reached for her silver star, pinning it back on her uniform as chaos unfolded around her. The medal had been earned with blood and sacrifice. No corrupt judge could diminish its value, just as no court order could bury the truth forever. One of the FBI agents approached her. "Commander Winters, we'll need a statement from you regarding Operation Blackwater Dawn." She nodded once. "I'm at your disposal, Agent, though I believe the documents speak for themselves." As she gathered her things to follow the agent to a more private setting, she glanced back at Reynolds. He was being quietly informed of his rights by the second agent, his career ending in real time before a courtroom of stunned witnesses. The reporters surged forward, questions flying, but security was already establishing order. Aaliyah moved through the commotion with the same calm precision that had guided her through far more dangerous situations. The interview room at the FBI field office felt sterile and confined compared to the open courtroom. Aaliyah sat straight-backed in an uncomfortable chair, facing Agents Rivera and Moss across a table scattered with photographs and documents from the classified file. 3 hours had passed since the dramatic scene in Judge Reynolds' courtroom. "Walk us through it again, Commander," Agent Rivera said, tapping a satellite image showing a compound outside Kandahar. "When did you first suspect the financial connections led back to the U.S.? Aaliyah's mind flashed back 3 years, to the heat and dust of Afghanistan, the weight of her rifle, the weight of command. "It was after we secured the hard drives from this location," she explained, pointing to the compound. "Our intelligence analyst, Lieutenant Park, identified unusual transaction patterns. Money moving through Swiss accounts, then the Caymans, eventually into real estate developments in Virginia, Florida, and Arizona." Agent Moss leaned forward. "And at what point were you ordered to terminate the investigation?" 26 hours after discovering the American connections. We were conducting surveillance on this second location when the order came through. Stand down, extract immediately, turn all intelligence over to handlers who would meet us at Bagram." Rivera exchanged glances with Moss. "That's not standard protocol." "No, it's not," Aaliyah agreed. "But when orders come through that chain of command, you follow them." The memory was still sharp. Her team had been confused, frustrated. They'd tracked the network across 3 countries, lost 2 men in a firefight at the first compound. To pull back just as they were closing in felt wrong. But orders were orders. "Tell us about the operation itself," Moss prompted. "The citation for your Silver Star is heavily redacted, even in our files." Aaliyah took a slow breath. The classified nature of Operation Blackwater Dawn had been part of her life for so long that speaking about it openly felt almost transgressive. "We deployed as a 12-person team," she began. "Our mission was to identify and disrupt a financing network supporting attacks on coalition forces. Initial intelligence suggested it was centered around opium production, but what we found was more sophisticated." She described how they had infiltrated the first compound after confirming it was being used as a communications hub. The firefight had been brutal, but brief. 2 of her team members, Specialist Ramirez and Lieutenant Harris, had been killed securing the building. The hard drives they recovered contained financial records going back 5 years. Lieutenant Park was our tech specialist. She identified unusual patterns immediately. This wasn't just drug money. There were legitimate business interests involved, construction companies, import-export firms, even a commercial real estate group operating in multiple countries, including the United States, Rivera noted. Yes, Park traced transactions to several American companies. One was Meridian Development Group. Moss slid a photograph across the table, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a luxury condominium complex in Northern Virginia. Standing prominently in the center was Malcolm Reynolds, then still a federal prosecutor, holding oversized ceremonial scissors. "Meridian's flagship project," Moss said. "Reynolds was an early investor. His financial stake helped secure permits when local opposition threatened to shut it down." Another photograph followed. Reynolds shaking hands with a man Aaliyah recognized from intelligence briefings. Hassan Malik, ostensibly a Pakistani businessman, but suspected of laundering money for multiple terrorist organizations. "Did you know about this connection during your mission?" Rivera asked. Aaliyah shook her head. We identified Meridian as receiving funds through the network, but we were ordered to stand down before making specific connections to individuals. She remembered the frustration in Lieutenant Park's voice when the termination order came through. Sir, this goes deep, Park had said. Someone powerful doesn't want us following this trail. At the time, Aaliyah had dismissed it as typical analyst paranoia. Now she wondered if Park had understood more than the rest of them. A knock at the door interrupted them. Martin Chen entered, looking tired but determined. My client has been cooperating for 3 hours, he said. I think she's entitled to know what exactly is happening here. Rivera nodded. Fair enough. She slid a document across the table. A federal indictment, freshly unsealed. Judge Reynolds has been under investigation by our public corruption unit for 18 months. What happened in court today accelerated things considerably. Aaliyah skimmed the document. Money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The indictment painted a picture of a corrupt prosecutor who had climbed to the federal bench on the back of tainted money and political connections. What I don't understand, she said, looking up, is why now? Why me? Why orchestrate this confrontation in his courtroom? Moss and Rivera exchanged glances again. That wasn't our doing, Rivera admitted. The declassification of those files and their delivery to you came from higher up, way higher up. Someone with enough authority to declassify Operation Blackwater Dawn wanted Reynolds exposed in a very public way, Moss added. We were notified to be in position, but the strategy wasn't ours. Aaliyah thought about the courier who had delivered the file that morning. No explanation, just the folder with proper authorization codes. She had assumed it contained additional details for the hearing. Instead, it had contained the truth she'd been kept from for 3 years. What happens now? She asked. Reynolds is in custody, Rivera said. The indictment covers his financial crimes, but with your testimony about Operation Blackwater Dawn, we can establish a direct connection between his investments and terrorist financing. The implications were staggering. A federal judge who had knowingly profited from money tied to organizations targeting American forces. The same judge who had tried to humiliate her by ordering her to remove the medal she'd earned fighting those very forces. There's more, Moss said, sliding another file across the table. Reynolds wasn't acting alone. We've identified at least 3 other federal officials involved with Meridian and similar investment vehicles. Aaliyah opened the file to find photographs of 2 senators and a high-ranking Justice Department official, all with ties to Reynolds and Meridian Development. This is why your operation was shut down, Rivera explained. You were getting too close to exposing some very powerful people. Martin Chen leaned forward. My client has cooperated fully. What assurances can you give that she won't face retaliation for her role in this? It was a valid concern. People with this much power rarely went down without taking others with them. Commander Winters is officially recognized as a key witness in an ongoing federal investigation, Rivera said. Any attempt to retaliate would be taken extremely seriously. Aaliyah appreciated the sentiment but knew the reality. Official protection had limits, especially against people who operated in shadows and proxies. I'd like to contact my team from Operation Blackwater Dawn, she said, particularly Lieutenant Park. If this goes as deep as you suggest, they should be aware. We've already placed protective details on your former team members, Moss assured her. Lieutenant Park is currently being brought in for debriefing. Her technical expertise will be valuable in tracing the financial connections. Aaliyah nodded, relieved. Her team deserved to know that their sacrifices hadn't been in vain, that Ramirez and Harris hadn't died for nothing. Chen gathered his notes. I think we're done for today. Commander Winters needs rest. Rivera nodded. Of course. But before you go, Commander, there's something you should see. She slid a tablet across the table. On it was a news website with the headline, Federal Judge Arrested in Dramatic Courtroom Confrontation. Below was a photograph taken from the courtroom security camera. Aaliyah standing tall in her dress blues, silver star now prominently displayed, as FBI agents approached Reynolds' bench. You're trending, Commander, Moss said with a slight smile. The initial reports are careful, given national security implications, but the image of a decorated SEAL taking down a corrupt judge has captured public imagination. Aaliyah felt a twinge of discomfort. She hadn't sought publicity, and the story being crafted in the media, while compelling, simplified the complex reality. "This isn't about me," she said, pushing the tablet away. "It's about the system working as it should, eventually." "Nevertheless," Rivera said, "you've become the face of this case. Reynolds' supporters will come after you. They'll try to discredit your service, question your motives." "I've faced worse," Aaliyah replied simply. Outside the field office, evening had fallen. Chen walked Aaliyah to her car, both of them scanning the surroundings out of habit. The weight of the day's revelations hung between them. "You know this isn't over," Chen said finally. "Reynolds has powerful friends. The other names in that file even more so." "I know," Aaliyah agreed. "But I've been shot at by better people than corrupt politicians." Chen smiled despite himself. "I've represented military personnel for 15 years. You all have the same gallows humor." "It keeps us sane," she replied, reaching her vehicle. "What's next from a legal standpoint?" "Grand jury testimony, most likely. The case against Reynolds appears solid, but they'll want to establish the direct connections to the terrorist financing. Your first-hand account of Operation Blackwater Dawn will be crucial." Aaliyah nodded, processing this. After years of silence about the mission, she would now be explaining it in detail to civilian jurors. "Get some rest," Chen advised. "And Aaliyah, watch your back. Not everyone in Washington wants this story told." She drove home to her small apartment near Quantico, mind replaying the day's events. The judge's face when he realized what she held. The documents outlining how American political careers had been built with money that had also financed attacks on American soldiers. The two worlds colliding in that courtroom. As she parked, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Park here. Being brought in for debriefing. Told you there was something bigger. See you soon, Commander." Aaliyah smiled slightly. Lieutenant Park had always been the most perceptive member of her team. She'd sensed the wrongness 3 years ago when they'd been ordered to abandon the investigation. Inside her apartment, Aaliyah removed her dress blues and carefully hung them in her closet. The silver star caught the light as she did, reminding her of Reynolds' dismissive order to remove it, not knowing the medal represented her role in uncovering the very network that had funded his rise to power. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of a classified mission, never knowing that its premature termination had protected the very people they were ultimately fighting against. Now those worlds had collided in a federal courtroom, with her as the unwitting catalyst. Tomorrow would bring grand juries, testimonies, and likely attempts to discredit her by those with everything to lose. But tonight, for the first time since Operation Blackwater Dawn, Aaliyah felt the weight lift slightly. The truth was emerging, and whatever came next, she would face it with the same discipline and courage that had earned her that silver star. The grand jury room felt smaller than Aaliyah had expected. After 2 weeks of preparation, she now sat before 18 ordinary citizens who would determine whether the evidence against Judge Malcolm Reynolds and his associates warranted a trial. The lead prosecutor, AUSA Diane Lockhart, stood nearby, organizing her notes. "Remember, Commander," Lockhart said quietly, "just focus on what you witnessed firsthand during Operation Blackwater Dawn. The financial connections will establish through other witnesses." Aaliyah nodded, her uniform crisp despite the humid Washington summer outside. Since the dramatic courtroom confrontation, she had been at the center of a carefully managed media storm. The Pentagon had issued brief statements confirming her decorated service record while declining to comment on ongoing investigations. Political commentators speculated endlessly about what a Navy SEAL might have uncovered that could bring down a federal judge. The door opened and the jurors filed in. 18 faces, studying her with undisguised curiosity. Lockhart had explained that while grand jury proceedings were secret, humans were still humans. The story of what happened in Reynolds' courtroom had made national news. "Commander Winters," Lockhart began after preliminaries were complete, "please describe for the grand jury your role in Operation Blackwater Dawn." For the next 2 hours, Aaliyah methodically recounted the mission. The intelligence that had led them to the compound outside Kandahar, the firefight that had cost 2 team members their lives, the discovery of the financial records that traced terrorist funding back to legitimate businesses, including Meridian Development Group. "And when did you receive orders to terminate the operation?" Lockhart asked. 26 hours after discovering the American connections. We were specifically instructed to cease all investigation into the financial trails and turn all materials over to handlers at Bagram Air Base. Did you question these orders? Alia chose her words carefully. I requested clarification on the rationale, given that we appeared to be making significant progress. I was informed that domestic agencies would be taking over the U.S. connections and that our mission parameters were limited to overseas operations. A juror raised his hand, and Lockhart nodded for him to speak. Commander, did you believe that explanation at the time? I accepted it, Alia replied. In special operations, mission parameters change based on intelligence that field teams aren't always privy to. It's not uncommon to be redirected. But did you believe it? The juror pressed. Alia met his gaze directly. No, I did not. Neither did my intelligence analyst, Lieutenant Park. The abruptness of the termination order combined with the significance of what we'd uncovered suggested intervention from powerful interests. Another juror spoke up. And when did you learn about Judge Reynolds' connection to Meridian Development? The morning of the court hearing, when I received the declassified file. That was the first time I saw evidence directly linking Judge Reynolds to the financial network we had been tracking. The questioning continued, with jurors particularly interested in the chain of events that had led to her appearance in Reynolds' courtroom. Alia explained the ostensible reason for the hearing, a jurisdictional question regarding evidence, and how Reynolds had demanded she remove her silver star. In your professional assessment, Commander, Lockhart asked, was Judge Reynolds aware of the origins of the money invested in Meridian Development? Based on the documents I reviewed, yes. There were multiple communications indicating knowledge of the money sources, including meetings with Hassan Malik, who was on watch lists for suspected terrorist financing. When the session finally concluded, Alia felt drained. Revisiting Operation Blackwater Dawn brought back memories she usually kept carefully compartmentalized, the loss of her team members, the frustration of the aborted mission, the sense that something larger had been at work. Outside the grand jury room, Lieutenant Jessica Park waited, now in civilian clothes. Since being brought in for debriefing, Park had been assigned to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit as a technical consultant, her expertise in following money trails proving invaluable. How'd it go? Park asked as they walked through the secure corridor. About as expected. They were particularly interested in the timing, how the declassified file arrived just as I was scheduled to appear in Reynolds' court. Park nodded. That's still the missing piece. Who orchestrated that timing? Someone with serious clearance pulled those strings. They reached the building's side exit, used for witnesses who needed discretion. Martin Chen waited by a dark SUV, scanning his surroundings with the vigilance of someone who understood threats could come from unexpected quarters. Any issues? He asked as they approached. Clean testimony, Alia replied. Where are we with the protective orders for the team? Since the story had broken, Alia had insisted that every member of her former team receive security monitoring. If Reynolds' connections reached as high as they suspected, retaliation was a genuine concern. In place, Chen confirmed. Though Martinez reports being approached by a reporter claiming to have information about irregularities in the team's actions during Blackwater Dawn, Alia frowned. The discrediting has begun. It was inevitable, Park said, sliding into the SUV. Too many powerful people implicated. They'll try to undermine our credibility, paint us as rogue operators who misinterpreted legitimate business connections. That's why the financial evidence is crucial, Chen noted as he pulled into traffic. Your testimony establishes context, but the money trail doesn't lie. They drove in silence for several minutes, each lost in thought. The case had expanded significantly in the 2 weeks since Reynolds' arrest. 2 senior congressional staffers had been taken into custody. A deputy assistant secretary at Treasury had resigned abruptly. The investigation now spanned multiple agencies, with the FBI, FinCEN, and military intelligence all involved. We're being followed, Alia said suddenly, eyes on the side mirror. Chen checked his rear view. Black sedan, 2 cars back? Yes. 3rd time it's appeared on our route. Driver is male, passenger position blocked by tinted windows. Without comment, Chen executed a series of turns designed to confirm surveillance. The sedan stayed with them, maintaining consistent distance. Options? Park asked, tension evident in her voice despite her training. We're 10 minutes from the FBI field office, Chen said. I can head there. No, Alia decided. Drive to the National Mall. Open space, public, plenty of cameras. If they're just watching, fine. If they want to approach, let's make it somewhere visible." Chen nodded and changed direction. 20 minutes later, they parked near the Washington Monument. The sedan stopped 100 yards away. "Stay in the vehicle," Aaliyah instructed Park and Chen. "I'm going to take a walk." "Commander, that's not advisable," Chen protested. "If they wanted to harm us, they would have tried something on the road," Aaliyah reasoned. "This feels like an approach, not an attack. Keep your phone ready to record." Before either could object further, she exited the vehicle and began walking toward the monument. From her peripheral vision, she saw a man exit the sedan and follow. Average height, expensive suit, moving with purpose but not aggression. She stopped at a bench with clear sight lines in all directions and waited. The man approached, maintaining a respectful distance. "Commander Winters," he said, not a question. "Who's asking?" He produced an identification card that Aaliyah recognized immediately. National Security Council staff. "Daniel Harrington, I need 5 minutes of your time." "You could have requested a meeting through official channels." Harrington's expression remained neutral. "Some conversations need to happen outside channels. You've stepped into something larger than you realize." "Terrorist financing flowing into American political circles? I think I grasped the significance." "That's just the surface." Harrington sat on the bench, maintaining space between them. "Reynolds is a symptom, not the disease. The network you stumbled upon in Afghanistan extends into places that make a federal judge seem insignificant." Aaliyah studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're about to receive an invitation to testify before a closed Senate committee. Before you do, you should understand the landscape." "And what landscape is that?" Harrington gazed across the mall, seemingly ensuring they weren't overheard. "There are people who believe this investigation should be contained, limited to Reynolds and perhaps a few obvious associates. Clean house just enough to satisfy public outrage, but keep the deeper connections buried. And the alternative? Follow every thread, regardless of where it leads, which is what you started to do 3 years ago before being shut down." He turned to face her directly. "The person who arranged for that classified file to reach you, they're part of a faction that believes the entire network needs exposure, even if it implicates people in positions of significant influence." Aaliyah processed this. "You're saying there's an internal power struggle over how far this investigation goes." "Precisely, and you've become a symbolic figure in that struggle. The decorated SEAL who wouldn't be silenced, who brought down a corrupt judge with nothing but the truth." "I'm not interested in being anyone's symbol," Aaliyah said firmly. "Nevertheless, that's what you've become, which is why I'm here to warn you. When you testify, powerful interests will be watching, some hoping you'll help them limit the damage, others counting on you to blow it wide open." "And which side are you on, Mr. Harrington?" He smiled slightly. "The side that believes serving one's country means confronting corruption, even when inconvenient." "Good day, Commander." Harrington walked away, disappearing into the crowd of tourists. Aaliyah remained seated, considering the implications of the conversation. After several minutes, she returned to the SUV. "What was that about?" Chen asked as she settled into her seat. "Politics," she replied simply. "Let's head back. I need to prepare for Senate testimony." The following week found Aaliyah in a secure Senate hearing room, facing the Select Committee on Intelligence. Unlike the grand jury proceeding, this was explicitly political territory. 9 senators sat before her, each with their own agenda and connections. Committee Chairman Senator Walsh began the questioning. "Commander Winters, thank you for appearing today. We're interested in understanding the full scope of Operation Blackwater Dawn and how its findings relate to domestic financial structures." For the next 3 hours, Aaliyah navigated increasingly pointed questions. Some senators clearly sought to limit discussion to Reynolds specifically, while others pushed for broader exploration of the financial network. "Commander," Senator Barton said, leaning forward, "would you say that Judge Reynolds was an anomaly or representative of a larger pattern?" Aaliyah recognized the trap in the question. Harrington's warning echoed in her mind. Some wanted containment, others exposure. "Senator, the evidence indicates that Judge Reynolds was part of a systematic network designed to move money from illicit sources into legitimate American investments and political influence." The financial records recovered during Operation Blackwater Dawn showed multiple entry points and beneficiaries within American institutions. A visible tension rippled through the committee. Senator Walsh attempted to redirect. Let's focus specifically on Meridian Development Group. What evidence links their activities directly to terrorist financing? Aaliyah remained calm but firm. The hard drives recovered from the Kandahar compound contained transfer records showing funds moving from organizations on terror watch lists through a series of shell companies, ultimately into Meridian's investment pool. Judge Reynolds received preferential investment opportunities in Meridian projects and, based on communication records, was aware of the origins of these funds. And you believe others were similarly involved? Senator Diaz asked. The evidence suggests so, yes. Lieutenant Park's analysis identified at least 17 American entities that received funds through similar channels. The investigation was terminated before we could identify all end recipients. As the hearing continued, Aaliyah noticed the committee splitting along predictable lines. Those with connections to implicated power centers attempted to constrain the narrative, while others pressed for complete disclosure. When the session finally concluded, Aaliyah felt the weight of what had transpired. This wasn't just about one corrupt judge anymore. It was about how deep the rot went and how many were invested in keeping it hidden. Outside the hearing room, media had gathered despite the classified nature of the testimony. Cameras turned as she emerged, reporters shouting questions about corruption and cover-ups. Aaliyah moved through them silently, her attorney deflecting queries with practiced ease. As they reached the exit, a voice rose above the others. Commander Winters, do you regret bringing these allegations forward? She paused, turning to face the assembled press. The question hung in the air, cameras recording her every expression. I regret that American soldiers died while fighting enemies who were being financed through channels that enriched American officials. I regret that it took 3 years for the truth to emerge. What I do not regret is doing my duty, both in Afghanistan and in that courtroom. With that, she turned and walked out, Silver Star catching the light as she moved through the doorway. Behind her, the media erupted with fresh questions, but she continued forward, mission-focused as always. In the following days, the case expanded dramatically. 3 senators announced they would not seek re-election. A deputy director at the CIA resigned. Federal agents executed search warrants at financial institutions in 5 states. 1 week after her testimony, Aaliyah received a package at her apartment. Inside was a handwritten note with no signature. Some battles are fought with bullets, others with truth. You've proven effective with both. The mission continues. Beneath the note lay a small flash drive. When secured on an isolated computer, it contained additional financial records extending the network far beyond what had been publicly acknowledged. Evidence of corruption reaching into intelligence agencies, defense contractors, and diplomatic circles. That evening, Aaliyah met with Lieutenant Park, Martin Chen, and the 2 FBI agents who had been present in Reynolds' courtroom. This goes deeper than anyone's admitting publicly, she told them, indicating the flash drive's contents displayed on the secure monitor. Someone wants us to keep pulling the thread. The question is who, Chen observed, and why use you instead of official channels? Agent Rivera studied the financial diagrams. Because official channels are compromised, this level of infiltration suggests counterintelligence concerns. So what's our next move? Park asked. Aaliyah considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, she had followed orders to stand down, even when those orders felt wrong. The consequences of that obedience had become clear, corruption flourishing in the shadows, protected by power and influence. We follow the evidence, she decided, through official channels where possible, alternative means where necessary. The mission parameters have changed, but the objective remains the same: identify and neutralize threats to American security, regardless of where they're located. As the team began analyzing the new information, Aaliyah reflected on how far this had come from that moment in Reynolds' courtroom. A simple order to remove her Silver Star had triggered a cascade that was now reshaping power structures across Washington. She touched the metal briefly, thinking of the men who had died during Operation Blackwater Dawn. Their sacrifice would not be wasted. The truth would emerge, regardless of how powerful those who wished to conceal it might be. Some enemies hid in distant caves. Others sat behind desks in Washington offices. Both threatened what she had sworn to protect. and Aaliyah Winters had never been one to abandon a mission.